Jorge Joestar, Chapter 10, The H.G. Wells. Captain Funnier Valentine spoke into his headset. "Houston, we have a problem." Just like in the movies. In no time, Narancia and I were caught, our arms fastened tightly to a bed. Narancia was so confused he didn't think to use his stand. We had appeared out of nowhere a moment after they discovered the moon, and while the rest of the crew was still reeling, one man calmly began to question us. "My name is Enrico Pucci. May I ask your names?" Narancia didn't appear to speak English, so I answered, telling him my name and address. This made Pucci's eyes widen momentarily. "What?" "Nothing," he said. Clearly there was something. "Hey, I'm your instrument. Someone needs you. I'll take you to him." That's what Tsukumajuku had said. Who was it who needed me? What did he mean, he was my instrument? He seemed as if he knew everything, understood everything, but threw me off the deep end without even attempting to explain. Without even explaining how he came to be still alive. Was it even possible he wasn't dead? I couldn't believe that he'd been faking his death. I'd seen a photograph of Tsukumajuku, his head hanging back, cut through the neck until it was barely attached to his body. Was there any chance that photo had been a mistake, a trap, a fake? I couldn't tell from here. I stared at the pebble phone on the floor. None of the astronauts had realized it was a phone. I wondered if it could still get a signal. Stand powers could ignore the laws of physics. It would probably work just fine. If it would connect to Morio, I could ask someone to look into things for me. "And your companion's name?" Pucci asked, bringing me back to the present. All I knew about Narancia was his name, and he seemed disinclined to speak. So I said, "He's a wise guy." Mafia is Italian, and it seemed likely Narancia would know the word gangster as well, so I did my best to allude to the truth in English. Pucci glanced down at the knife he'd taken off Narancia. There was a crest emblazoned on it, the mark of the Passion family. Pucci asked nothing further about Narancia's identity, moving on to other questions, but I didn't know how we'd come here, so I couldn't begin to answer them. When I said we'd come from Morio and Nero Island, the other crew members exchanged glances. "Morio? Nero Island? Seriously, is this part of the land sailing phenomenon?" Someone said. Was that what they were calling it? "Very well. For the moment you'll have to stay put. For your own safety," Pucci said, and went back to the others. I tried to remember everything I'd read about Pucci in the news. Enrico Pucci's path to being an astronaut was an unusual one. He'd started out in seminary school, and had served as the priest at a prison before making a dramatic career change that had been the talk of the country at the time. When he told a reporter he was searching for a way to get to heaven, it caused quite a stir. "Hey, dickhead! What the fuck's going on? What'd you start and do to us?" Narancia snarled, kicking my leg repeatedly. I ignored him. The astronauts on this spaceship were all scientists, and they'd begun talking to Houston about our sudden appearance, the discovery of the third moon, and any connection there might be to the two mysteriously moving land masses back on Earth. I kept one ear on their conversation, stared at the view out the window and thought. From the window I could see the third moon, hidden on the dark side of Mars, from a different angle than the astronauts, but the existence of this extra moon must have something to do with me being here. The timing of our arrival also had meaning. The satellite floating outside the window was very small and round, an almost perfect sphere, nothing like the other two moons. Phobos, which did 2 orbits of Mars a day at a height of 6,000 kilometers, and the even smaller Deimos, which did 4 orbits at the height of 2,300 kilometers, were both misshapen lumps of ice and rock. This third moon was unusual both as a satellite and as a celestial body. For one thing, it had no craters. No dents or bulges. It was smooth like a mirror, but it didn't appear to be made of gas or liquid. The astronauts had already determined that much in their analysis. From the infrared properties of the moon's surface, it was clearly made of rock. Had it been carved out back when Mars still had water? I wondered, but that was impossible. There were no rivers that could tumble a rock 5 kilometers in diameter. Not on Mars, which had half the dense diameter of Earth and 1/3 the gravity. What explained the lack of craters? Was it possible it had simply not been hit by any asteroid since the universe began? But how could a sphere like this be created in the first place? Even more mysterious was the moon's distance from Mars. From my eavesdropping on the astronauts' discussion, it was only 8 kilometres above the surface. Since the atmosphere of Mars was 10 kilometres, that meant it was inside the atmosphere. It should have either been flung away or crashed back into the surface of Mars, but it was staying put. Physics be damned. Just as I concluded that this moon was definitely the reason I'd been brought here, a sound like a dull chime echoed inside of me, and for a moment I got excited, thinking it was caused by getting something right, like the light bulb over a character's head in comics. Did that shit happen for real? But of course it didn't. It wasn't all in my head either. It wasn't in my head at all. It was in my belly, somewhere in my internal organs, a real sound so deep I could feel the reverb spreading through my body. What? I snapped my head round and looked at Narancia. He was glaring back at me. What? You ain't a stand, master? Or is it already out? He was using his stand on me. Inside me. Stop it. I don't have a stand. What? Fucking liar. He glared at me a second longer, then broke his gaze. Whatever. If you don't want to die, don't move your head to left. Got it? Inside me there was a psh, followed by a shroom, as something went rocketing forward, filling my blood and flesh with bubbles. Shit. What had he done? It went past the back of my belly button, up past my heart, headed for my shoulder. Wherever it went, something spread from my lungs and heart like a wake, shaking them, making waves inside me. This could only be a missile. No, it had a propeller. It was a torpedo. The tip of it reached the skin of my left shoulder. Bam! It burst through the skin and shirt. Blood splattered on my left cheek. Tremendous pain followed a moment later. If I'd moved my head, would this torpedo have passed through my neck and made my head explode? I screamed, covered in blood. The astronauts came running. Or didn't. They took a step towards me, and then stopped, staring at us suspiciously. Fuckers! Narancia yelled. Why don't you come check on his wound? Don't you feel sorry for him? Valentine Pucci and the other crew members, Poco Loco 777 and Gohalai Soundman, were both just staring at Narancia, no matter how much he shouted. This wasn't right, I thought. I wasn't sure what was passing between them, but it seems Narancia and these 4 men were beginning to understand each other. And whatever that understanding was healthy. You motherfuckers can see it, right? Narancia yelled. You all stand masters? I don't care if you are or not. Die! 4 shots in a row echoed through my stomach, and they rushed across my back. Pop, pop, pop! Long missiles burst out of my side, and tiny wings snapped into place in the air, and they headed for the 4 astronauts. They were clearly cruise missiles, and there was an attack submarine inside my body that had fired them. This was Narancia's stand. What are you doing? This ship's too small, I yelled, but Narancia didn't give a shit. Shut up! First blow wins, he snarled, and I rolled myself into a ball a moment before the missiles hit the 4 astronauts. I braced for impact and took a tight hold of the bed in case the hull breached, as I didn't want to be sucked out into space. I was already tied to it with a zip tie, but that was much too thin to support my entire body, though it might just cut through my wrist. I heard 4 muffled explosions, and something hit the wall. I looked up and saw a sand monster standing in front of the astronauts, all the sand swirling as it swallowed up the smoke. It was a stand. Narancia was right. Shit! Another missile was fired inside of me, passing through me and out my back, and hitting me in the wrist. And then my hand was blown clean off! I thought, but a moment later I noticed I could still feel my hand holding onto the edge of the bed. The missile didn't shoot my hand off, it shot the zip tie off. Now my hands were free. I turned to tell Narancia, but before I could, he shouted, "Wake the fuck up!" and punched me. Crack! I felt my upper left canine break, and even though the punch left me quite woozy, I clearly caught a glimpse of a white tooth and a spurt of blood flying out of my mouth. And something hiding behind the tooth. A submarine. Surfaced. Just as the tooth was about to reach the famous Native American astronaut Soundman, it was knocked back by the sand monster, and rolled sadly away into a corner. My poor tooth. A submarine that can dive into the bodies of living things, Soundman said, glaring at Narancia. But it could not escape my eyes. Narancia grinned back at him. Submarines were made for hiding. Why do you think I left it surfaced? Drops of blood landed on Soundman's face. My blood from when the tooth was knocked out. Narancia's submarine surfaced briefly on top of the blood splatter, as if to mock Soundman, and then it began rocketing forward. I finally got it. Like Soundman said, this stand can move freely through the human body, including human blood and teeth, and almost certainly through skin and other bodily fluids as well. And if the host body touched another, it could transfer to the new one. Narancia had injured me, hoping they'd come to treat my wounds, and in the process come in contact with me. Nothing easier than tricking people who think they've got good eyes! My Das Boot is a fleet! Dive, dive, dive! Narancia shouted. Then a strange sort of gun emerged from his open mouth. The hand holding it was clearly not human. This inhuman hand pressed the gun's barrel to Narancia's forehead, and Funny Valentine said, Hold your fire. I can kill you before your missiles explode. With Funny Stan's arm sticking out of his mouth, whatever Narancia shouted was unintelligible. The hand vanished, and a second later, a torpedo shot into his open mouth, hit the back of his front teeth and exploded. Everything below Narancia's nose was blown clean off. Narancia had a submarine inside his own body too. When the hand dodged his attack, he'd ended up injuring himself with his own stand. But despite the scope of his injuries, Narancia was still conscious. Ah! Motherfucker! He roared. And the submarine in Soundman began pop, 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 firing a hail of missiles that Soundman Stand, the sand monster, wrapped itself around, containing the explosions in the swirling stand. Fud, 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 fud. Hugger! Eat fifth! Narancia howled, and I guess he started attacking Sandman from the inside, because there was a series of muffled splats, and the back of his NASA suit exploded. But the hand that had come out of Narancia's mouth appeared again, emerging out of the top bunk of the bunk bed, a humanoid stand with eyes like camera lenses. It pointed the weird-looking gun at the back of Narancia's head, and didn't hesitate to pull the trigger. But Narancia's head wasn't blown off, and what wounds he sustained were skin deep, because the bullets Funny as Stan fired were all exploding just before they reached his head. A series of bright fireworks went off between the gun barrel and his head, and I saw the bullets themselves bouncing off the wall nearby. Each time the gun fired, submarines floating just inside the surface of Narancia's skin fired missiles deflecting the bullet trajectory. It was an incredible sight, but in such close quarters, in a spaceship filled with delicate equipment, firing a hail of bullets and missiles was hardly the best idea. Do you want to die here, Narancia? I shouted. Even if you survive this fight, how will we get back to Earth? He was still young, still looked like a boy. Maybe I could work that to my advantage. You'll never see your friends again. Narancia hesitated for a moment. Like any young gangster, his compatriots were the only thing keeping him from being alone in the world. But, shut up! They ain't taking you here! I shame the Hessian name into the family means! He shouted like a well-trained soldier, the dark fires of a trained killer igniting in his eyes again. Shit, I thought, but then I saw him start to sweat, beads of it running down his face. Not just his face, but every inch of him. Great drops of liquid that weren't colourless at all, but green and purple all mixed together. And when I looked back up at his eyes, the gleam was gone and they were hollow and unfocused. Why? Narancia suddenly burst into tears laughing. Yeah, I can done it now. I'm gonna die here. Don't forget me. It's late. Hasio. Hissa. Jono. His face was a mess, and the drops falling off him weren't sweat but melting flesh, and clearly Narancia's entire body was rapidly rotting away. I turned around, and the astronauts had stopped attacking. Behind Enrico Pucci was a humanoid stand, with a crown-shaped mask, every inch of its body covered in letters signifying the DNA-based sequence. Everyone but him had gone back to their duties as if the battle were over. Even Soundman looked fine, but I thought his back exploded. What happened? Pucci caught my puzzled look and said, Mr. Sandman's body is almost entirely composed of sand. Since he was a child, his people are native to the desert. As he explained it, one day his body suddenly understood sand, and sand him, and he and the sand absorbed each other. Things like this happen to humans sometimes. When people fully accept the land they live in, they become one with that land. There are not enough examples for it to have a name, but Mr. Soundman and I call it bound. People have always adapted to their environment. People in the savannah learn to see far across the grasslands, and webs grow between the fingers of professional swimmers. Even without such physical transformations, we all grow accustomed to our surroundings, learn to fit in, but this is far beyond that. Those who are bound completely merge with their environment, or become the environment itself. They don't adapt to it, they are it. And Mr. Soundman is lucky to be bound. You are not a stand master, are you, Jorge Joestar? When he said my name, I jumped. Somehow I'd fallen asleep. I looked up and Poochie stepped over to Narancia, reached out his hand and pulled two discs out of his head. Narancia had no expression and was muttering under his breath, his face and body rotting, festering, bits of him ready to fall off at any moment. Poochie had done something to me too. I didn't remember wearing a hat, but sticking out of my forehead was a visor, round and flat, some precious part of me given shape by Poochie's stand. I couldn't let him take it, I thought, but I couldn't move a muscle. I could feel my arms and legs, but they weren't mine to command. Poochie just took the disc from my head and ran his fingers across it. Only one disc. You really aren't a stand master. Oh? You're adopted. And adopted by the Joestar heir. I could hear what he said, but couldn't understand. I couldn't think at all. Poochie put the disc back in my head, and it slid smoothly back inside, vanishing without a trace. My mind returned with it. Do you know how to get to heaven? Poochie asked. Poochie'd done something to me. I assumed he'd given me enough control of my body back that I'd be able to answer his question. I tried to speak, and found that I could. Barely. Isn't that what you're supposed to tell me, Father? I whispered. Poochie's eyes gleamed. It is. You're a good detective. You always find the right answer. But not where it concerns the one who brought you here. The one who vanished soon after. You don't understand what Tsukumajuku Kaito said. Yet. He'd read my memories. By pulling that disc out of me. Watching my surprise, Poochie smiled, as if having a good day. Detectives are a wonderful thing. Everything has meaning, huh? God is everywhere, Poochie said. God is the Word. The Word has meaning. Thus everything in this world has meaning. I see. You coming here too has meaning. And you were brought here because someone here has need of you. Who could that be? Behind him, Polka Loco 777 said, Hey, there's someone else coming. He's going to destroy the H.G. Wells. What? Funnier shouted. Who? I don't know. Look, Sandman said, staring out the window at Mars. My sand's been caught by something. I could see it out the window near me too. Part of the sand Sandman had sent swirling into space was still floating there, but it was turning randomly, the shape of it shifting and morphing. You aren't doing this? Funny asked. The same question I had. Soundman shook his head. It's not me. And not the rotting Italian kid. Narancia's entire body was rotted through, and he looked ready to crumble at any moment. I could tell at a glance why he'd mentioned Narancia. The prow of his dad's boot could be seen inside the swirling vortex of sand. Soundman must have ejected the stand inside him along with this sand, but out in the vacuum of space, the sand was moving as if there were forces acting on it that couldn't possibly exist, and as it swirled, it was falling towards Mars, moving faster and faster. As we followed its path, the astronauts and me all saw the same thing. Hey, what are we seeing? What we were seeing was a black string wrapped around the mass of sand, pulling it towards the tiny new moon, floating closer to the surface of Mars. Something string-like extended from the surface of this moon out into space, and it had captured the mass of sand. Was there something on the moon's surface? Houston, are you seeing this? Funny asked. The answer came over the loudspeakers. Yes, we can't believe our eyes. We're trying to analyze it, but is someone fishing from the surface of the moon? That's the only thing we can imagine, but... Soundman, you've lost all control of that sand? Polka Loco asked. The Native American astronaut shook his head. It's too far away. It's gone back to being normal sand. Polka Loco turned to Poochie. Yo! Wake the Italian dipshit up and see if he can move this sub. Sure thing, Poochie said, and slid the disc he'd stolen from the rancher back into his melting head. and submarines appeared on the surface of my skin, and Poochie's, and the other astronauts, as if waiting for their master to reboot. 1, 2, 3... Damn, he's got a whole fleet of these things, Polka Loca said. What hell's he been through to control a stand like this at his age? He may only been 16, but he was abused by his father, betrayed by his friends, sent to juvie, bullied. Then he became homeless and was preyed upon by street gangs. The 23 people he's killed since joining the mafia were all low-life scum. No sin's worth calling a sin, Poochie said. He put the other disc back in Narancia and spoke to him in Italian. God has forgiven your sins. You will no longer act against me. Narancia went from looking like cheesecake left outside for 10 days to his old self. Even the damage he'd done to his mouth was repaired somehow. Light came back to his eyes, and he looked very surprised. Huh? I thought I killed all of you. Had he been shown an illusion? Why would you try to kill us? Poochie said. There's no need. We're your friends, and if you do as we say, we won't have to throw you off this spaceship. That clearly didn't entirely sit well with Narancia, but he didn't quite manage to argue it further, which terrified the shit out of me. Jesus, stands could control the human mind and emotions to this degree? And I knew for sure that Enrico Pucci was evil. If he had a good heart, he'd never dream of tinkering with the hearts of man like this. He wouldn't lie to them. Good is evident in deeds. Good tries to influence feelings and motives through appeals to logic and critical thought. If that deed leads to a good result, it's good. If the intent too was good, perfect. The opposite wasn't good. If the deeds caused harm, they were evil, even if the intent was good. The extenuating circumstances rendered the intent moot, and if the intent was bad, punishment should be meted out without hesitation. There are many shallow fools who put too much stock in good intentions, and a man before me was one of them. This man was so sure of his own good intent, he paid no heed to the evil he wrought at every turn. Narancia, your ship out there. Can you move it? Pucci said, pointing out the window at the mass of sand and the dust boot being pulled towards the third moon. They were quite small and far away now. It's not too far to move, but I can't move it. That sand isn't a stand anymore, is it? Strictly speaking, my dune is almost certainly not a stand, but, Soundman said, nodding. Once it gets far enough from my body, it becomes ordinary sand again. My dust boot can only move inside living things rather stands, but I can still fire missiles. Should I blow this spaceship up? Don't, Pucci said, but Narancia was grinning. Then maybe I should blow that round thing up, he said, glancing at the third moon. Pucci followed his gaze. Better not. I believe it has great meaning. Fuck that, Narancia said, goofing off. Pucci slapped him and the disc popped out of his head again. Pucci ran his fingers across it again. I despise boys who can't mind their manners, he said and put it back. Life returned to Narancia's face again. That was my bad, Father Pucci, he said, bowing his head. I promise I ain't going to be that dumb again. Lack of education decides your limits, Pucci sighed. Narancia's expression changed completely. You trying to fucking say I'm stupid? He snarled and whipped out a knife he'd kept hidden through all this turmoil. Pucci looked surprised. How? The human unconscious is beyond the reach of man. Pucci dodged Narancia's knife a few moments, got the disc out again, and had just made him throw the knife away when H.G. Wells, prepare for attack, came over the speakers. Thud. A massive impact shook the ship, and we were all flung hard into the nearest wall, or to the floor. What? Polka Loco shouted. This is Houston, the speaker said. H.G. Wells, are you safe? What was that? Funny demanded. A breakdown? We took control of the ship remotely. Emergency measures required the reverse thrusters fire for another 5 seconds. Then you'll go quiet and pull away from Mars. What? Is the mission cancelled? No, simply a temporary measure. Once you're at a safe distance, we intend to look for an angle to return. But first you need to see something. Houston was clearly struggling to keep the panic out of their voice. H.G. Wells, we found something positively unreal when we examined that image. First, a string towing the sand. Have a look at this. Everyone pulled themselves together and looked at the largest monitor in the living quarters. The image on screen was a 3D image showing the thread from the moon branching onto countless other threads, all stretched upwards. It looked like a plant, or bacteria. but instead of a route, they all led back to that sphere. The sphere was so small, and the length of the thread stretching in all directions so great that we didn't recognise it at first. "The little ball in the middle is the third moon," the speakers explained as we all stood stunned. "A great quantity of tentacles are reaching up from the surface of the moon. We fired the reverse thrusters before those arms could grab this ship. If you continued on course, you'd already be in a forest of those tentacles. It remains to be seen if they can snare you like they did that mass of sand." The entire crew was thinking furiously, saying nothing. "That's not the end of it," the speaker continued. "The next shot is from the ultra-high resolution images you sent. What it shows? We can't believe this is really happening." It showed a man with long hair. He was half naked, wearing only a loincloth, and there were horns on his head, a terrifying grin on his face. He was looking right at the camera, his eyes clearly focused directly on it. "The fuck?" Funnier whispered. I'm sure they heard him. The man in Houston somehow managed to scream without raising his voice. "Do you see the string in his right hand?" I glanced at the moment. There was a rope of some kind leading from his wrist towards the screen. "That rope connects to the third moon. He's running with a 5-kilometer moon, trailing 8 kilometers above the surface of Mars like a balloon. With a single rope, he's kept the third moon trapped on the back of Mars. He's hidden the moon on the back of Mars all this time by running with it." At the equator, the diameter of Mars was 6,794.4 kilometers. That meant the circumference was 21,334.4 kilometers. A day on Mars was 24.62 hours, so at most he'd have to be running at 866.54 kilometers per hour across the surface of Mars, 240.7 meters a second, 3/4 of the speed of sound. That figure was assuming he ran constantly without sleeping or resting. The gravity was only a third that of Earth, but even so, was it humanly possible to run that fast? "He appears to be standing still right now," Funnier said. "Yes, that's what's so frightening. This creature can run even faster." "Hey, Soundman Sand reached the moon," Pocoloco said, looking out the window. Narancia had been watching all this absently, but suddenly he frowned. My dad's boot's moving again, huh? That's weird. It's on the surface of the moon." A headset periscope appeared over Narancia's right eye, and he peered through it. I don't know much about these things, but the moon's alive?" What was he talking about? While I stared at Narancia confused, Pocoloco screamed. We all looked through the window, and saw what he'd seen. In the distance, we could see the tiny moon hovering, and could see that it had turned to face us. The moon was a giant eyeball, and the lid had just opened.